Hi, Dr. Tobin. Today I'm going to be talking about If a Tree Falls by Jennifer Rossner. Jennifer Rossner wrote this autobiography to share her stories of motherhood and her children's development, specifically communicative development, under the circumstances of their deafness and hard of hearing diagnosed at birth. This takes place in the early 2000s. To start off with my first takeaway, I continue to relearn that communication is a privilege. On page 104, she states, "My daughter's words would have power," after her daughter spoke her first word given all of the other auditory circumstances. And I also learned that the deaf community is such a tight-knit group and culture. And I learned that it just makes so much sense because there's this shared unifying factor that is a part of the community. And I got to see this through her two little daughters bonding over the fact that they had shared deafness. And then I also learned about the difficulties with mobility between the communities, because there's a gray area where one of her daughters fell, where she wasn't necessarily signing and identifying with the deaf community versus being in like typically functioning society. And I also continue to relearn that development of a disabled child isn't a deficit, but merely just a different trajectory that society needs to be aware of and realize. And I also learned more about the emotional roller coaster of a parent whose child has been diagnosed with a communicative disorder or deficit. And my last takeaway is that accessibility is so important. Now, the strengths of this book is that the mother is an impassioned, determined human that is fighting for experiences for her daughters, and she's very knowledgeable on the speech-language pathology world. So it really is a highly educative book. Weaknesses is that because of this knowledge and experience and privilege that she had coming from a higher socioeconomic class, it doesn't show all the perspectives of accessibility in the healthcare world. The author overall was extremely engaging and convincing to demonstrate this need for greater awareness of what it means to be disabled or have lack of hearing. And she does this by providing a lens for the decision processes a caregiver or advocate for a child's communication development has to make when that child is deaf or hard of hearing. In the moment, she shows what it was like for her to discover that her baby, her precious little girl, was deaf. And she showed that when her world seemed to be coming crashing down. And she also showed that through little side stories of her own ancestors in the 1880s in Czechoslovakia when their little babies were deaf and didn't have the resources that they needed. And although accessibility has changed over time and modern medicine has changed over time, the goals of spreading awareness for what it means for deaf people to engage in community, those needs are still ever present. And she does this excellently through comparing these two stories. She also demonstrates the prejudices that exist within the deaf community and also outside of the deaf community. Some people say you shouldn't get cochlear implants. Some people say that you should only learn sign language. Why change that person's anatomy? And so there's a lot of prejudices that impact people who are deaf or hard of hearing themselves, but also the parents making decisions, which just goes to show the awareness that we need to make we need to increase as a society in order for us to grow and help the deaf or hard of hearing community. And she also goes to show the intricate relationship between language, hearing, cognition, and behavior. She goes to show just how her daughter was often confused a lot of the time, which prevented her from building language because she didn't have the auditory cues to help her not be confused in situations. For example, little footsteps, knowing that someone is coming towards someone. That daughter didn't have that. So in order for her to build language, she had to like simplify environments sometimes, which just really goes to show like how important of a role cognition plays with language and how someone with a disability has to work even harder in some other aspects cognitively. And some biases of this book is that the mother and the parents were extremely privileged and financially very privileged, and their two daughters had experiences that a lot of people would not have access to, like going to an all-deaf school, and parents just having resources. So I would recommend that someone who is not as knowledgeable in the field if they read this book, which was so excellent, to read maybe another book about a different experience where healthcare isn't always guaranteed in the United States, which I could go on about that. So the author overall plays an immense role in creating awareness for disability and provides a positive view for disability by showing at first the assumptions and prejudices that she carried within herself for deafness before having her babies. And then she also creates this highly detailed memoir of her daughter's development, which just demonstrates to the readers just how highly capable those daughters were, how smart they were, how many words they had in sign language, verbally, and just how much of a village it takes of speech language pathologists, audiologists, and how important healthcare and awareness in those fields just are. And it also demonstrates the goal of accessibility and awareness when someone is diagnosed with a disability in communication. And again, she did that through showing the side of her deaf ancestors. And that plays such a big role because we need to realize as a society that our past roots or not that long ago, our lack of accessibility isn't that long ago. So these stigmas and then these unconscious thinkings are still ever so present. And it makes me think and take a second look at my own prejudices. The fact that only 2.8% of the population knows sign language, I can't even imagine how isolating or hurtful that is for people to not have access to communication with 97.2% of the population. So that makes me check in on my own privilege and understanding of why I haven't learned sign language. Overall, this is an excellent book. And again, if a tree falls, it goes back to being if you're not perceived, then are you actually existing? And I think that's a really quote to end on. So I'm going to end it there. But thank you, Dr. Tobin.